to talk to you really briefly today. So I'm only going to talk for like 10-15 minutes and have a bit of a discussion at the end on how we might deal with some situations. But given that the restrictions are lifting, now I say it with a sigh because they've lifted and they've come back, and they've lifted and they've come back. So given that they're lifting in the sense that, we're encouraged now to go back to the office, there are, there's no need to wear masks from this week, I think it is. So there's certainly an ease happening over the next couple of weeks, and we're certainly seeing organisations having to adapt to that, where they've had to, and I think most of you guys will be either office based or rather than say a factory or a shop or something. So it's going to be relevant to most people in the sense that it's back to the office chat. And what we're seeing, especially as employment lawyers and in the HR space, is quite a few challenges actually with this, because people are saying, well, I've worked from home for, I don't know, 2 years now, or, I actually have all of this new work-life balance, or whatever it might be. And so I just wanted to talk through some of those things to, first of all, bring them to your attention if you're not aware as to why people might challenge some of these requests that you're making in terms of returning to the office, and also just chat through some best practice that we can take away from today. So some of you might not be in a management position, you might be coming at it from an employee position, but equally, I think this should apply to everybody. So first of all, considerations. I think it's important that we think about the impact of the pandemic on certain people. Like there's certain individuals who will have been impacted to the extent they now have a mental health condition. They may have never experienced any mental health during their lifetime, but then because of the pandemic, they've experienced social isolation, they've experienced anxiety, and certainly we're seeing a lot of anxiety increasing because of the need to return to work, and because sometimes as well when the restrictions relax, that actually causes more anxiety for people because they're feeling, oh, maybe I'm going to catch COVID quicker. So it's just thinking about the fact that everybody's on I always say we're all in the same storm, but in a different boat. And that's really important because, applying what works for you isn't going to, it's not going to work for everybody. So think about the impact on mental health. Think about how the business may need to adapt still, even though we've obviously already adapted quite a bit to the home working on a temporary basis. Is that something your business is going to facilitate moving forward? And think about things like childcare, work-life balance, and implications of returning to the office. So whether that could be financial, travel, cost, people will start to bring some of these issues up as either challenges why they don't want to, or why they feel a bit nervous in returning. So it's just important to think, I suppose, a bit more laterally, rather than, well, Boris says go back to the office, so everyone come back tomorrow. Think about how you go about that, what you say, and do a piece about active listening. It's not just, your contract says you've got to come back. It's thinking about what the impact might be in the long term. Next slide, please, glamorous assistant. So one of the things I did last week actually was an interview. Oh, was it last week, this week? I've done several interviews. I do a lot with the media. And one of the things that BBC Look North and BBC Leeds were asking about was, well, why might people challenge? And then they also said, well, why might people actually want to come back? So I'll talk about the challenges first. And these are kind of the common things that I'm seeing where I'm having to advise clients because people are actually refusing. So lots of people are saying, well, actually, I've realized I've saved loads of time and loads of cost not commuting anymore. So actually, I'd prefer to stay at home because I'm getting that time back and that time is valuable to me. We're seeing that as a result of that, they've got better work-life balance. And we're also seeing that people are generally more productive from home. That's not everybody. I think some people do, I think I'll come on to why people want to come back, but we're seeing a lot of people are more productive at home, or the fact that they've got the ability to work from anywhere, so they can go to a cafe or whatever it might be, so they can work from an environment that suits them rather than in an office on fixed times. And we're finding that certainly I've got anxiety and PTSD and ADHD. And because of that, sometimes noisy environments, distractions and things like lots of people in the office or phones ringing or doors slamming can be really, really distracting for me from doing particular types of work. So for me, and certainly I know a lot of people who have disabilities have said that actually home working has been really beneficial for them. Not necessarily all of the time, but actually to do those tasks where you need to really focus, so you can gain that focus back. So considering again, it's not necessarily that people don't want to return full time. Often when they're challenging it, sometimes it might be, but consider, is there a hybrid approach? Is there some particular task or a couple of days a week that they might want to just have that space and that focus, because actually you get more out of people if they feel more focused and less distracted, as I can account for myself. But also, thinking about other disabilities and accessibility. So what we've found is the ability to work from home has opened up the job market to lots of people who have disabilities, whether that's physical or mental impairments, especially those who are neurodiverse, who find the traditional office environment very, very difficult because of the social side of it. So that type of thing, I think, is really, really important to think about. And again, that's something that where, Carrie might be able to help as well. And you've got recruiters on here who can talk about how you might be able to recruit in an inclusive way. And using the kind of the flexible model is a really inclusive way to recruit, because actually you're getting some really top talent, but just applying a flexible working model means that you can keep them and retain them and they'll work at their best. Because actually, if it's an office-based role, lots of people just won't apply because they feel they can't do it. And then also, again, I mentioned before about anxieties about returning to work, but some of that is related to getting on public transport. Some of that is related to the fact that people haven't been around lots of people. Some people have still, been working remotely the whole time. I know of people who haven't been to their office for 2 years because that was their company's decision. There's been no face-to-face meetings, and so that can cause a serious level of anxiety because they're in a big group, especially where the restrictions have been relaxed. So again, just thinking about what some of those challenges might be. And then I suppose another one might be anything to do with childcare, where they've now adapted their working environment to their childcare. And I don't know whether that was agreed formally or informally, but actually that might have an impact. So they might need a bit more time to put some childcare in place so that they can then come back to the office or work more flexibly around that. So it's just considering all of those potential elements of discrimination as well. Next slide, please. So what do we want to check? So coming from a lawyer, I know there's other lawyers on here, but put my lawyer hat on and my HR hat on. Obviously, from an employer's perspective, most people will be contracted to the office. So there is a legal requirement for people to go back, in the sense that that is what they've agreed in their contract of employment. So think about the fact that if that's the case, have you actually, either via email or verbally, varied that contract and agreed that on a more permanent basis, or did you say it was specifically because of the restrictions? So look at that communication around the home working and any flexibility that you've given to that individual, and we need to check whether or not that amounts to what we call a variation of the terms and conditions or a variation to the contract. And also looking at like the policies that you've got in place. So what often people have done, and what we've seen organisations doing recently, is they'll have put all these fabulous policies in place about home working, smart working, flexible working, hybrid working, and then the contract says work from the office. And so checking that there's no inconsistencies there, because we've talked about all of these new ways of working and we've worked them for a significant period of time. So just checking that that it's clear that it was on a temporary basis and what the legal position is, and making sure that those policies are consistent with what you want to do now and where you're going in the future, so that it's really clear exactly what people need to do. So say, for example, the contract says you have to work in the office. So the employer goes, okay, we want everyone to come back next week. We're going to do it in a staged, do a consultation. We'll do it staged. So those people who want to come back straight away can come back. Those who need a bit more time to sort childcare or whatever it might be can come back later. And then it's looking at the policies in place where, for example, people might then want to apply to work from home. Now, you don't have to have a policy in place to apply to work from home, but it's helpful for people to know that that's there. So if they then further down the line, say, for example, in the consultation, they're happy to come back to work, then they come back and actually, I'm not working great in the office. This actually isn't really working for me. And actually, you can see they're not performing well. Then you've got a clear process in which they can apply for that home working on a more permanent basis. You can also have what we call a flexible working policy. So that's where you have a permanent change to the contract of employment. And that's way it's not just location, it could be hours as well. So it might be their hours are flexed around childcare, or it might be that it doesn't have to be around childcare, but it's just an example. Their hours are also flexed as well as the location, and you can also flex the days as well. So basically it's just a flexible working request to the entire terms, and they can request what they want to change and why. But what we have in place at Thrive is what we call a smart working policy. So I hear a lot of hybrid working, and I think that's just basically where you work part from home, part from the office. But you can have a hybrid work policy if that's what you want to do. However, what we say at Thrive is we say we work smart rather than hard. And what that means is people can choose when and where they work, provided that the client needs are met. So the smart working policy sets out the parameters and the boundaries for that. And what that gives us is the flexibility. So if people are having a bit of a rubbish day mentally, or they know they've got loads of stuff on and actually they just need to work from home, they don't have to make a formal request. They can just log it on the system. We know where they are. Obviously they'd let management know, but they know they've got that ability to work from wherever they want. That's resulted in, as Rachel was saying, me working in Thailand for 3 weeks and Dubai for a few weeks, because we've got the principle that we can work from anywhere. And in fact, one of our staff has just, she's in Dubai at the moment. She's very junior. She's only a paralegal, and she's worked there for 3 weeks because her family lived there and she didn't get to see them because of COVID. So it gives you that flexibility on a more permanent basis, but it sets the boundaries. And I think if you're going to do that, you need to be really clear, like, what do you want? Because obviously if everybody just said, oh, well, I'm not going to work until 10 a.m, then that means in the morning, if you've got an urgent client meeting or whatever it might be in the morning, you're not going to have that cover. So you have to put systems in place. We use technology to help us with that. So people log their home working on a weekly basis. And then if they want it on the day, they just speak to me and I can sort it. But it's making sure, the point being is making sure that there's a policy in place, because what we found previously was when we did this on a more relaxed basis, I would end up, and it was my fault, I would end up with having no one in at a certain time because I hadn't communicated that properly. So learning from my mistakes, I found that having those smart working policies and those clear processes in place have been really, really helpful. But regardless of what you do, just making it very clear in your communication what you expect from people. And if you do have challenges, deal with them on a case-by-case basis, rather than having like a blanket, well, everybody has to come back, I don't care, that's what your contract says. You're going to start to face potential risks from discrimination angle, from whether it's disability or sex discrimination for childcare reasons. They're the main two risks that we're finding are arising. Now, the other risk could potentially be that especially where there's discrimination involved, is that someone might resign and claim constructive dismissal because they feel the relationship's broken down if you don't deal with it properly. So again, the way you deal with it is important, not least because you don't want to obviously end up in a tribunal, but also for morale. You want to have that collective team back in the office, everyone's productive together. And even if that's on a more hybrid or smart working basis, it's about making sure that everybody's on that journey together. Next slide, please. So just a few just a few comments on what you can do, which I've kind of touched on some of these already, because I always do this and jump ahead. But essentially, communication for me is the most important piece with this. So making sure you consult with the employees. So that could be as a collective, and then inviting people on a one-to-one basis, depending on the size of your organisation, to speak with either their line managers or with HR if they've got any concerns, or they want more of a detailed discussion in terms of how that might look for them personally. Consider if there's any adjustments you might need to make for people, especially where you've got mental health, neurodiversity, or physical disabilities. Do you need to make any adjustments to their role in the office because of what's happened over the last 2 years? The position might have changed, or they may have already had adjustments before which you've forgotten about because they haven't been in the office. So just putting those back in place. Also considering again, if their disability might affect their ability to do the work from the office. Is it a new employee that's only ever worked from home? So again, just thinking about all of those potential risks, and really actively listening as well. What I found has worked really well is where the communication has been good. And what I mean by that is not just what the employer says, it's how they listen and the employees feel heard. There's a lot of dictating happening in lots of workplaces, saying this is happening, this is how it's going to go, just do as you're told. And what we're finding is they're the ones that are really struggling now. So taking that bit longer to have that conversation, actively listening. And what I mean by that is we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. So ask the questions, understand why people don't want to return to work, if that's the case, or what their anxieties are, and try to come up with a solution on how you might tackle that. And it might be that they do come back, but you have a plan in place so that they feel more comfortable and that anxiety is released. And then obviously I've mentioned the adjustments already, but making sure that if you are agreeing adjustments, whether they're on a temporary or a permanent basis, if it's just to transition back, or if they're on a more permanent basis, how does that look? And those adjustments have to be reasonable. It's not just, you know, anything that the employee wants to get them back to work. You have to balance the needs of the business as well. And the other thing to consider is, once you've gone back to work, or even actually if you do it beforehand, is to do some surveys or some pulse questionnaires, understanding like what's the general consensus. Do people want to come back? Do they not want to come back? Trying to understand. So before you implement the policies, get people involved in that process. That's the best way to lead a group of people through change, is to get them on board with whatever that change might be. And when you've got the majority involved, it certainly helps when you're then trying to transition into whatever that normal then looks like for you.